I've got flashbacks of what actually happened, but I couldn't tell you, like I say, all I know is the time span that it happened, and I remember the specifics of what he did, but that's it. I mean, one of my ex-partners suggested coming forward saying, maybe it could sort of stimulate other people to come forward. I felt incredibly guilty about not bringing this to the forefront because of my own mental health. I couldn't risk that. I've got a son. I can't risk sort of, but I feel eternally guilty about it. It's something that I think about a lot. It's something, that it's really hard to deal with. I'm looking around the prison as I'm walking to my wing and I'm thinking, wait a second, there is no women here. There are just no women at all. I couldn't find one woman. So I'm like, okay, I've not got any friends here. I've not seen any women, but hey, we're cool. We're tough. We're a prison officer. I'm full of beans. I'm ready to go. And they put me on this wing. And I'm greeted by the principal officer. And he looks me up and down, looks really disappointed. And the first words he said is, where are you from? And I said, I'm from Style Prison. And his exact words were, what the fuck are they doing sending you to me? So basically like, you're no fucking use at all. So he said, that's my office there. Go sit at the desk. When I want a cup of tea, that's your job. Do not come out of the office. If the alarm bell rings, so we have like an emergency alarm bell. If the alarm bell rings, lock yourself in my office. But your job is to make me tea. And I was like, and I tried to argue back because I'm a bit of a anti-authoritarian, really. So I tried to argue back and I went, puffed up my shoulders and I went, look, I've just been through training. I'm a prison officer. I know all the up-to-date policies and I know this and I know that. And he just went, get in the office. So this senior officer locked me in an empty cell over dinner time. At first I thought it was, oh yeah, it's a big joke and all the rest of it. They're going to let me out after a couple of minutes. I was pressing the bell like a prisoner does, pressing the sort of let me out bell. Not one person came to let me out. So I was left in a cell on my own over dinner time. Oh, this is terrible. They, at lunch times in the staff sort of rest room, they used to put porn on. And it was awful because I was the only woman. I think the time I'd been there, I'd seen like one other woman, and they put me on this wing, and they're putting porn on in the office while I'm there, and I'm the only female, and I'm like, this is really fucking uncomfortable for me. I can't do this.
Hi everyone, you're very welcome to this week's episode of Purple Akki podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, please like, subscribe and click the notifications bell so you don't miss any future videos and updates. If you're listening on audio only on Spotify or Podbean, please click follow. And please check out my vlogging channel, Pitch Spotting with Padraig. The link to the channel will be in the description below. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by a very interesting lady. She's a former prison officer and governess in some of the major prisons in the UK, including Style, Brixton, Strangeways and Walton. She's also a storyteller extraordinaire, a Shanachie, as we say over in Ireland. I look forward to hearing a few of those today. So Holly, thanks very much for coming on.
Thank you for asking me. Pleased to be here.
Okay, so I've been telling my friends all week that I have Daglish coming on the podcast, so they've been excited. I don't know if they have the same reaction though when they see your face. But
I was about to say they're going to be sorely disappointed, aren't they?
Queen Kenny.
Maybe not, but Kenny was my nickname at work.
Last week, I was helping Holly sort out a couple of Liverpool tickets as a Christmas present. So hopefully your son won't see this because it'll ruin one of his Christmas presents. But
Yeah,
I was hoping to get them in the Kenny Daglish stand, or the Sir Kenny Daglish stand, I should say. But unfortunately, they're in the main stand. Better view, but you never know. You might be able to nip down to the hospitality suite and get a photo with the great man.
that would be great.
A long distance relation, no doubt. Like, it's not the most common surname. Like.
I'm absolutely sure we're related somehow.
So, Holly, I suppose I came across you first on the Real Porridge podcast.
Yeah.
And then Sean Atwood, and I was in awe really of some of the stories you had. Your fascinating life. You've come through a lot, which we're going to touch on in the interview today. I'd just like to give a thank you to a former podcast guest, a mutual friend of ours, Lee Davies, who managed to hook us up together. So thanks very much for that, Lee. And Lee's podcast is at almost 2,000 views, so the gauntlet is shown down there, Holly, to eclipse that.
Oh, I've got to beat that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I know you love a challenge and you're competitive, so we'll see how we go. I'm sure we'll do that anyway. And Lee has been a great support to the channel as well. When he had the interview with Lad Bible, he promoted our interview as part of that, which is great. So
bless.
So before we suck into it, you have your brew nearby for the cheers and good health fireside chat.
Cheers.
Happy Friday.
Happy fucking Friday.
Just to show solidarity with Wales, you got knocked out of the World Cup there with the Belgium, and by coincidence have their colours as well in the flag on my top today. So
isn't that also Iran colours as well?
Or Italy, so that's solidarity for them not qualifying. You could also argue. So get there. But yes, you're right. I think the Iran flag. As you can tell, my sallow skin have Iranian roots there, like, So.
Yeah, obviously Arab descent, definitely.
Arab descent, yeah. Ahmed. So, just for people who are not aware of you, and I suppose I'm hoping that people will become very much aware of you over here in Ireland, because I think your story definitely deserves great exposure. Could you maybe just give a bit of background of your early life and what it was like growing up for you, Holly?
Well, you would say I had a very typical middle class upbringing. My dad was a teacher. My mum was an office manager. I went to a really good school. I went to the school that my dad taught at. So on the surface, I had a good life. Unfortunately, I was really, really badly behaved teenager. So I smoked pot when I was 12, took acid, was very much into the party scene as I got older. It's an absolute miracle that I managed to pass my GCSEs and my A levels, because I was absolutely off the rails for many, many years. Unfortunately, and I'm quite happy to disclose this, that one of the reasons I went off the rails was due to sexual abuse that was occurring at the hands of a sports coach that I had worked with for many years. Looking back now, I can tell that he'd been grooming me from the age of about 9, really, 8 or 9. And unfortunately, this translated into physical sexual abuse from the ages of about 11 till 14. So I didn't tell anyone about this. It was, a big secret. And obviously, I didn't link the two together until I was older. So I didn't link the fact that was contributing to my bad behavior. So I'd gone from sort of like an A-star student at school to someone who was smoking, drinking, skipping school at dinner time, to take acid with my friends and come back to school in a maths lesson and be completely off our heads. I was a
I could
complete.
barely do maths 100% sober, so I can imagine an acid like.
Well, it didn't help me. I'm completely calculexic. So yeah, so on the surface, really nice upbringing, really lovely holidays, but behind the scenes there was a lot of trauma going on. My parents had a difficult upbringing. I was born, they had an affair together and eventually left their subsequent partners, left children behind, and I was the what I called the band-aid baby. So I grew up believing that I wasn't wanted. um I was regularly told by my dad that my mum had tried to get rid of me, and yeah, so it's only later on in life that these experiences have sort of formed the sort of mental illness that came much later on in life, which I'll talk about later on if you like. So yeah, I couldn't wait to leave home. I couldn't wait to go to university, and my plan was to go as far away as possible. So I went from a little town in Hertfordshire to Preston, University of Central Lancashire, where I studied psychology. Unfortunately, despite a skill or an aptitude for psychology, because I was offered a master's, um, I used my time at university to go raving. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate. We're talking the early 90s here. It was the party scene, Hacienda, Cream, you name it. We went to it, and I had a lot of fun. And I came out with a reasonable degree, not knowing what the hell I was going to do with this degree. So I was looking at the police. I was looking at going abroad. I was looking at, don't laugh at me now. I was looking at joining, you are going to laugh now. I can already see the smile on your face. I was looking at joining the FBI because I wanted to be a psychological profiler. Because I've always had a fascination with, this sounds really dark, serial killers. I was into all the Stephen King novels, horror films, really sort of dark stuff. Always been really interested in the human psyche, how we why people do what they do, basically, just really fascinated. And again, probably not, only later on in life linking that maybe back to my experiences as a child. But as it was, I wanted to join the police, and unfortunately, the police physical test put me off because I'm a lazy cow and I didn't really want to do lots of running. And my dad suggested the prison service, so I was like, great, do they have a physical test? And he said no, and I'm like, right, I'll apply for them. So I thought my interest was still in psychology. That was what I wanted to do. I wanted to become a psychologist. And the view was I can join the prison service and then maybe transfer over to psychology. However, this is going to sound really sort of money driven, but I'll be honest, it was. Psychologists were getting paid £10,000 a year. I mean, this is going back 20, 22, 23 years. But prison officers were being paid nearly £15,000 a year. So for someone fresh out of university, this was like, wow, this is going to pay my rent. This is going to pay, for my car. I'm going to have spare money. So I went in as a prison officer, and that's how my career began.
I just have a question there, Holly. And just at the start, you mentioned about the predator in your youth, and in one of the other interviews you did, that kind of alarmed me to hear that this guy is still working with kids today.
Yeah. I make regular checks on the internet to see what he's up to. I haven't checked for a little while, actually. I did make a report to Crime Stoppers. I did report it to a charity that specifically works with victims of domestic abuse. Sexual abuse. And nothing was done. And one of the reasons that I have never, I mean, I'm starting to disclose it now, but one of the reasons is because I felt I wouldn't be believed. My parents, I believe, they've seen podcasts where I've talked about it, and it's kind of like this dirty secret that's not spoken about, which is upsetting. And ultimately, it would be his word against mine. I don't, having spoken to the charities that I've spoken to, the legal people that I've spoken to, the likelihood of a conviction would be incredibly low. And it's whether, with my mental health, my parents' failing physical health, it's whether I can do that and put myself through that, on the off chance that nothing would happen. So it's devastating to know that he's still out there. I hope now, because of his age, that he's sort of not being able to do what he did. I guess he's probably in his even probably 70s now. But yeah, it was really hard. And one of the things that comes with childhood abuse is your memory shuts down. So your memory shuts out sort of like traumatic incidents, shall we say. So my actual memory of the specifics of what happened is not good. So timings, dates, where it happened, things like that. So again, this all contributes to the likelihood of the likelihood of a conviction going nowhere. So yeah, it's desperately sad.
I listen to a lot of podcasts, and there's one that became very popular in Ireland about George Gibney. I don't know if you heard of it or not, but he was an Irish swimming coach that coached a lot of famous swimmers in Ireland. But yeah, he had a range of victims that he was abusing as a swimming coach, and it made into a series where they're trying to track him down. And look, I suppose you may not be the only one. I suppose is the point I'm getting at. That
yeah, I definitely don't think I am.
Yeah.
I think if you have a predilection for young girls, it's not a one-off. It's not because I was special. It's not because I was beautiful. It's not because he picked up on my vulnerability, which came from sort of how I was treated at home. He fulfilled that father figure for me. But I do believe, and I think I've said this in previous podcasts, if you are born this way, if you are attracted to young girls or young boys or whatever, that's what you're attracted to. And I have no doubt that I was not the only one.
Yeah. Like you mentioned as well about having specific dates and times. I was called for jury duty a number of years ago, 4 years ago at this stage. Now I live in Cork, but I'm on the register in Limerick. So I got a letter to my home address saying I need to do jury duty in Limerick. So I could have just said no, I'm living in Cork, but I said, fuck it, I'll go up for the 2 days and stay with a cousin to be a bit of a laugh, like catch up with people.
Yeah.
And I went up for jury duty, and it was a similar case where it was a sexual abuse case. So this guy, there was two friends who he'd abused, and they both took him to court, and it was 50 years ago. Sorry, maybe not 50, maybe 30 years ago, give or take. And there was a lot of pressure put on the witnesses to provide dates and times and as much info as possible. And obviously they were kids at the time. Like I remember thinking it was very unfair, you know, because unless you kept a journal or a diary from 30 years ago, you're not going to remember specific date and times, like, you know. So yeah, I sat in on the trial. It was tough to listen to.
Yeah, exactly. And like I say, it was traumatic. And you know, I've got flashbacks of what actually happened. but I couldn't tell you, like I say, all I know is the time span that it happened, and I remember the specifics of what he did, but that's it. I mean, one of my ex-partners suggested coming forward saying, maybe it could sort of stimulate other people to come forward. But again, this is going to sound, I felt incredibly guilty about not bringing this to the forefront because of my own mental health, really. And it's sort of having been sectioned, having nearly unalived myself, they call it now. I couldn't risk that. I've got a son. I can't risk sort of, but I feel eternally guilty about it. It's something that I think about a lot. It's something, that it's really hard to deal with.
No, 100%. Anyway, we'll move on from that because obviously that's a very morbid, that's different.
Morbid, yeah.
But just getting back, and look, I suppose whatever you decide to do, obviously that's your own decision. But I hope it works out for you, whatever you do decide.
Thank you.
So just I suppose moving back, you're 21, you're fresh out of college.
Yeah.
It doesn't really see much point in doing a degree if they're going to pay a pittance starting off, like, isn't it? If the prison officer.
Like I say, I wanted to be a psychologist. That's what I wanted to do. So the prison service had never even entered my mind. It was just not. I think, like I say, my dad suggested it as potentially a stepping stone to psychology within the prison service. And because I had this sort of morbid obsession with crime and serial killers and things like that, I thought, okay, this might be a good experience, a good stepping stone to move towards the psychology area. The only issue was I just really started to enjoy my job.
You mentioned having an obsession with serial killers. I actually am married to a serial killer enthusiast as well, so a bit of that has rubbed off on me. Like I've watched a lot of.
You were married to one?
No, I said I'm married to a serial killer enthusiast. Like yourself, like.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm trapped in the room here, like Joseph Fritz.
Yeah, you're trapped in a cell. Oh my God,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
The fire is on though, so it's not too bad.
Yeah, and you've got a book to read, so you're okay.
And coffee.
And coffee.
So I can relate, like the Jeffrey Dahmer show and all that, and a lot of documentaries and shows and Netflix and stuff like that I picked up on, so it's grown on me a bit as well, so I can relate to that. Clarice Starling was an influence on you as well.
Oh, 100%. So I can't remember the year that it came out. I think I watched it maybe a year after on videotape then. I think we were still on videotapes. That's how old it was. And it just absolutely, I think what had happened previously is I had, at the age of 16, I travelled around Canada and North America with two friends. My friend was half Canadian, so we stayed with family and travelled around. I absolutely loved America. I still love America now. I'm completely in love with the country. And I actually looked at studying abroad. And I thought, yay, that would be my route into the FBI, because she really, I watched it. I was just obsessed with the film. I'm still obsessed with the film now. I must have watched it 100 times, and it never gets boring. But yeah, that was a real inspiration, and obviously it led me to read a lot of books about the start of the FBI and how it works. And yeah, that was my aim, and I did want to go to university in America, but when the realization came that I would be so far away from home, I'd be on my own, it sort of hit home a little bit that it'd be really tough. So yeah, it was the prison service was never my dream, let's put it like that. But yeah, I ended up there.
So your first day, you started in Style Prison.
Yes.
Can you maybe talk through your first day? There's a couple of humorous anecdotes from.
Oh, well, let's put it like this. So I was 18 years old. I'd been a party girl. I'd never had a fight. I'd never come across, like I said, a relatively middle class, easy upbringing. And style absolutely terrified me. Now, nothing prepares you for working with women. Let's put it like this, okay? Nothing. They are a completely different breed, okay, for lots and lots of reasons. I was 21 years old. All the training that we'd done was sort of geared towards men. So walking into a women's prison. So I'll just before I go into it, sort of I'll describe how Style is. So Style used to be a children's home. So it was built like a housing estate. So what you have is sort of rows of houses that can house about 20 to 30 people maximum. And there was like 3 rows of houses, and each house had a specific role. I'll talk about the wing later because that was built later on. So my first day, so I was on a late shift. So a late shift is 1 till 9 o'clock. And because we were a big lot of new staff, we hadn't been allocated any specific area to work. So we were just literally backfilling where we needed to be. So I turned up, uniform, immaculate. Okay. I looked like pristine. And I walked through the gate. Not one fucker spoke to me. Yeah. Not one person said, welcome, how are you? Do you want any help? Do you know I'm just across the road? This is my extension. If you need help, give me a ring. Nothing. I was handed my keys and I was handed my radio, and I was told to go to the house that I was working on. So this is a house unit. This was a house unit for foreign national prisoners. So these were women. A lot of the women had been drug mules. In fact, a significant amount of them were drug mules, and they were either waiting deportation or they were there to serve out their complete sentence in England. So there was a mixture of Brazilian, African, Asian, and every sort of nation you can think of. And these women, I felt sorry for them actually, because, you know, a lot of them had been coerced into this. A lot of them had the families threatened. But still, it was scary. Okay. So these women have been in prison for years, and they see a woman walk in, and I call myself a woman, but I wasn't, I was still a girl. They see a girl walk in, 21 years old, and the house units had their own kitchens. So their own kitchens they cooked their own food basically. So you had in your office a set of knives that you would issue to them. So I walk on the unit. I didn't know this. I didn't know any of this. Okay. So I walk on the unit and I'm thinking, I've sat at this desk and I think, what the fuck do I do? What do I do? So I thought, right, think of what I did at college. Right, go search the rooms. So I thought, right, go and search all the rooms and have a little look around and just observe them, see if they're up to any nonsense and things like that. And basically, they told me to shut up, go sit in the office. There was no problem. Just give me the knives. And I'm like, give you the knives? And they literally were walking around with carving knives, making their own food, chopping up, and they didn't speak very good English. But I gathered enough that they said, basically, we run the place. You don't need to do anything. Just sit there, counters, and then you report. So I spent 8 hours on this unit. Not one member of staff came to see me. I was completely on my own with like 20 women who didn't speak English but walked around with carving knives. And I was just literally shitting myself. And I thought, I just want to get through my first shift. This was scary enough with women walking around knives. But to be fair to the girls, they were settled. They've been there for years. You know, they just sort of made it dead easy. So I literally had nothing to do. I just sat there and issued knives, which was not good. But yeah, it was easy enough. But as I said, not one person spoke to me. At the end of my shift, a night officer came on, and again there was no interaction. I just gave them the radio, walked off, handed my keys in, and that was my first day. Quite uneventful, but terrifying all the same.
When your manager met you for the first time, he didn't give you the nicest introduction.
No, I didn't see a manager. I had to go and seek out. I think like a couple of days in, I had a bit of an issue. So they seemed to keep putting me on late shifts, which I didn't particularly mind because I like a line in the morning. But they put me on late shifts, and on late shifts, there's less staff because all the staff are concentrated in the day when most of the jobs are going on. So not one manager, I didn't know who my manager was, who my line manager was. So this one day I rang what we call the control room. I said, I need to speak to a manager. And the manager was like 3 houses along, just chatting with another member of staff who was their mate. And I literally exchanged like 3 or 4 words with her. She told me what I needed to know. And basically I was told to go. And that was my first interaction with a manager. That was it. You were just left to your own devices unless you had a serious issue. And even then, you had to deal with it yourself. So in fairness, it gave you a lot of experience, and your interpersonal skills were like bang, it had to be bang on because the managers couldn't give a shit, really.
Can you tell me, do you know you were saying that on your first day, some manager said to you, if there's the kettle when I need a cup of tea or something, you maybe
Oh, that was okay. So that was so just to give you the context. So when I was excuse my French, recruited for Style, there was about 25 of us all recruited at the same time because there was a new wing opening. So the new wing obviously needed new staff, but it hadn't been opened yet. So what happens is when you have a prison that is overstaffed, you are allocated to a prison that is understaffed. So I thought I was seeing this guy at the time who lived down south, and they were looking for people to go to Wormwood Scrubs, a very, very notorious prison in London, an old Victorian prison, dilapidated. They just had, the reason they were understaffed is because they just had about 60 staff either suspended or sacked due to prisoner brutality. Prison officers actually went to court and were found guilty of things like GBH, ABH, assault. So it was a really old-fashioned, misogynistic environment. So dickhead here thinks, oh, well, I'll go down to London because it's near my family. My family were near London. It was closer to my boyfriend, and also used to get paid a shitload of money for going to another prison. So literally you got sort of all your food paid for, your accommodation, everything like that. You were still getting paid your wages. You were getting like overtime pay. It was like win-win situation. So I'd only been at Style for about a month, 2 months when I got offered this position to go to Wormwood Scrubs. So there was about 20 of, we called it detached duty. So I'll just give you the sort of terminology. Right. So just imagine 20 of us are sent to London. Okay. There were 2 jails that people were working at, Brixton and Wormwood Scrubs. I was the only one that got sent to Wormwood Scrubs on my own. So I had none of my mates, nothing. And it was the similar experience to Style. So I got to Wormwood Scrubs. I was already shitting myself again. I walked through. I was given my keys. I was given my radio, and I was met with the manager. Hurrah! A senior officer, and he escorted me to the wing that I was working on that day. I looked around the prison, and it was full of rubbish. There were rats. There were cockroaches. It was just disgusting. It was a far cry from what I was expecting. Just visualize porridge. Yeah, if you've seen the program Porridge,
Well, with the comedy element.
yeah, just imagine porridge. Okay, so I'm looking around the prison as I'm walking to my wing, and I'm thinking, wait a second, there is no women here. There are just no women at all. I couldn't find one woman, so I'm like, ooh, okay, I've not got any friends here. I've not seen any women, but hey, we're cool, we're tough, we're a prison officer. I'm full of beans, I'm ready to go. And they put me on this wing. And sort of the ranks as they go. So it's prison officer, senior officer, principal officer. So a principal officer is the highest uniform rank that you can get in the UK prison service. So they take me onto this wing, and I'm greeted by the principal officer. And he looks me up and down, looks really disappointed. And the first words he said is, where are you from? And I said, I'm from Style Prison. And his exact words were, what the fuck are they doing sending you to me? So basically, like, you're no fucking use at all. So he said, that's my office there. This is true story. That's my office there. Go sit at the desk. When I want a cup of tea, that's your job. Do not come out of the office. If the alarm bell rings, so we have like an emergency alarm bell. If the alarm bell rings, lock yourself in my office. But your job is to make me tea. And I was like, and I tried to argue back because I'm a bit of a anti-authoritarian, really. So I tried to argue back, and I went, puffed up my shoulders, and I went, look, I've just been through training. I'm a prison officer. I know all the up-to-date policies, and I know this and I know that. And he just went, get in the office. Because he just thought, what, I'm 5'2". I was relatively slender at the time, hair piled on top of the head like it is now, makeup on. And that's the thing, I had makeup on, which was a big no-no, I later found out. And that was that. So my first day at Wormwood Scrubs was making tea for everyone.
Yeah, might be able to give you a part-time job there on the podcast, because definitely filled a few times. So I suppose being a female officer in the prison service wasn't ideal by the sounds of it back in the day. Could you maybe give an insight into what challenges you faced being a lady officer?
So Wormwood Scrubs was awful. I can only how can I say, it was character building. That's probably the only positive thing I can say. So just to give you, there's loads of examples, but just give you the first example. When I was allowed out of the office, okay, I went onto the landing, and there were prisoners out on the landing. Staff were in the office, and I was on the landing on my own. And I thought, okay, chat to them. I'm a chatty person. We were taught that, that interpersonal skills are really important. That's how you get to find out information. So I went on the landing, and I was chatting to prisoners. And that was my shift, and that was fine, and that was great. And they were really respectful. The prisoners were really nice, really interested about what Style was like, where I'd come from, what my experiences at Style were like. No issue. I had more interaction with them than I did with staff. So the next day, I'm pulled into the principal officer's office again. And staff had reported that I had been flirting with the prisoners. Okay. So I'm accused of flirting. I'm accused of, why am I wearing makeup? What's behind wearing the makeup? And I was kind of like, well, I always wear makeup. That's it just makes me feel a little bit better. So I'm accused of flirting and I'm told that I can't wear makeup. Okay, I accept this. Obviously, I was young, I was naive. It wouldn't happen now. So the I was assigned to another wing. Okay. So again, we just backfilled, okay, wherever there were spaces. So I was assigned to another wing. And bearing in mind, staff did not talk to me at all. It was disdain. They didn't interact with me in any way. I was literally there as a body. So they put me on another wing, and this is terrible. They At lunch times in the staff sort of restroom, they used to put porn on, and it was awful because I was the only woman. I think the time I'd been there, I'd seen like one other woman, and they put me on this wing, and they're putting porn on in the office while I'm there, and I'm the only female, and I'm like, this is really fucking uncomfortable for me. I can't do this. So instead of switching it off, I didn't ask them to switch it off, but instead of switching them off, I just went to the end of the wing and I sat on a prisoner chair eating my packed lunch, freezing cold because the wings were so cold. There was heating in the staff room, but where I was, it was freezing cold. And the only act of kindness was a older prison officer who obviously didn't want to go against his colleagues, but came to me and gave me his jumper. And that was the one act of kindness that I'll never forget. So he gave me his jumper. So still at Wormwood Scrubs, another day they put me on the segregation unit. Now, the segregation unit is where the worst of the worst go. Okay. So the segregation unit is where all the prisoner brutality had happened. So this is where prisoners had been horrifically beaten by staff. So you can imagine there is a very anti-staff culture by the prisoners. So they sent me to work on the segregation unit. I'm like, what the hell? I know nothing about dealing with these kind of prisoners. They put another guy down there with me who had something like, he was on detached duty. I think he had about 2-3 months service. So between us, we had less than 6 months service, and we're dealing with these prisoners that had either been brutalized or had been friends with the people that had been brutalized. And there's just me and this other guy. So the saving grace was, it was canteen day. So when they get canteen day, they get all the goodies basically. So they get like the chocolate bars, they got the tobacco, they got their, phone credit, or, they got all the little bits, that kept them happy. So we were issuing the canteen, which made them happy. So fortunately, the prisoners were settled. But there started to come a string of officers coming down to the segregation unit. Now, the rules generally are in a prison that you only go to the segregation unit if you have a reason to go there. So whether it be filling out paperwork, seeing a specific prisoner, whatever, but you've got to have a specific reason. So I start to notice this stream of male officers coming down, and they're just coming down, having a little wander around, and then going back upstairs. They weren't interacting with me. They were just looking, going upstairs, more coming down, going back upstairs. Eventually, one came down and approached me. And he was like, hi, how are you? And I thought, oh, how nice. He's like actually taking interest, seeing if I'm okay on the unit. And he said, yeah. He said, they told us there was some fresh meat on the seg. So that's why I've come down. as if
Jesus
that's
Christ.
gonna, and as if I'm gonna go, oh my God,
Thanks
will
for
you
coming,
date?
like.
Yeah, will you date me? I was just like, oh my God, I just couldn't. And right, this isn't coming from vanity, okay, at all. It's not for one reason that I thought I was like Claudia Schiffer. This was because I was literally one of the only females there. That's the only reason. So the pool, let's say that the sort of dating pool, the women's pool, was very, very small. So the competition was not um massive, let's say. So not for one reason do I think it was because I was beautiful. So yeah, so that was the kind of attitude that I dealt with at Wormwood Scrubs. It was really hard. I wouldn't call it traumatic because it just was what it was. That was how the prison was. It was misogynistic, it was racist, it was not a nice place to be.
Another thing you said in another interview, Holly, that kind of alarmed me was you were thrown into cells with prisoners by male staff. Could you maybe elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, so this happened when I went to Brixton Prison. Brixton Prison was a bit more light-hearted. People were friendlier. There was more of us on detached duty, so I had quite a few friends that were there. We were often posted places together, so safety in numbers kind of thing. But I was posted on a wing by myself on this one occasion, and they seemed friendly enough, and the senior officer seemed nice enough, and no issues. I was there doing my job. So when prisoners go to work in the morning, they congregate before they move en masse. So you can have at any point, so I'll talk about Liverpool prison later, but at any point you can have like 500-600 prisoners all moving to their place of work, whether it be different workshops or education. So there was I would say about 100 prisoners congregating, and my job was to stand at the gate and watch them move, to make them, to count them as they were going out. So we were just waiting, and the senior officer started, and these were, as I remember, sex offenders, I think. And the senior officer started talking about pornography, started talking about sex. I was starting to feel very, very uncomfortable. And then he started asking me, what's my favorite position, things like that. It was just horrendous. And what you do in the prison service, you don't chat back, you don't say anything, you just laugh it off. That's all you have to do, is laugh it off. This same senior officer later on in the day at lunchtime, so all the prisoners were locked away, basically. So this senior officer locked me in an empty cell over dinner time. At first I thought it was, oh yeah, it's a big joke and all the rest of it. They're going to let me out after a couple of minutes. I was pressing the bell like a prisoner does, pressing the sort of let me out bell. Not one person came to let me out. So I was left in a cell on my own over dinner time. I think after about half, they came and let me out. But again, ha ha ha, I just laughed it, because to be accepted, you had to go along with this stuff. Do you know what I mean? If you took it and didn't say anything, you were classed as sort of, okay, you're one of us. So you had to go through these certain challenges, I'd say. But the sexual stuff was just really, really awkward and quite prevalent. That's all I really incredibly misogynistic.
My understanding of hearing that story was that the prison officer threw you into a cell with an actual live prisoner, like, so
No,
that's not as bad. And obviously, it's still bad. It wasn't a
yeah,
cool
yeah,
thing to
yeah,
do, but
yeah.
yeah, it's not as bad as what I thought it was going to be. But you can tell there's very much a culture from what you're saying there, Holly, of put up or shut up,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the fact you did put up with that it's not right, but it stood to you in later years, the fact that you were seen as someone that put up and just got on with things, and you ended up moving up as a result. So
Yes.
it was a blessing in disguise in some ways, but obviously that's not really the point. But
Yeah, and I'm not defending that behavior in any way, but it just was the culture. It had never been challenged, So, like I say, as horrible as it was, I don't look back now and think, oh my God, I'm completely traumatized. I just look back and think that made me a stronger person. That made me, as I said, as I moved up the ranks, that sort of gave me this sort of motivation to be the person that I was and to not turn my back on behavior like that and not be the person who says, oh, that's fine. And I was later on in life a female manager, still in a sea of men, but by that point I'd found my voice, let's say. But it took a while. It did take a while.
there was also an officer you worked with who had an unhealthy interest in animals.
Yeah. So he was always odd from the start. So he was recruited after, quite a bit after me. So, I talked about the house units. So eventually you would be assigned a regular house unit. So he was on what I think it was called Wilson House at the time. Anyway, he was always a bit weird. Do you know what I mean? There was something about him that was a little bit off. So we started noticing things like it's quite often when you have prisoners in an office, you keep the office door open for lots of reasons. I mean, if you're female with a female, it's not as bad. But say I was in a room with a male prisoner, I would never be in a room with a male prisoner on my own, the door shut. I would always have someone else in with me. Or if I was on my own with him, I'd have the door open. And it's just for transparency, really. It's just, it's not like I'm going to be shagging, but, it's just for sort of safety reasons and transparency. But quite often he would be in the office on his own with women, and staff had walked in previously, and women would be leaning over the keyboard and stuff like that, and it was all a bit weird. And just to put into context, these women were detoxing off drugs, and they weren't the healthiest, and a lot of them were sex workers, and a lot of them didn't have teeth. It's quite shocking, really, but I'll come to a story about that later. Anyway, so he was always a bit iffy, and the rumours start swirling. The rumour mill, good old rumour mill, we love it. We love a little bit of gossip in the prison. We've got nothing better to do but gossip about staff. So he had a locker. So if you worked on a specific unit, you were given your own locker. Yay. What we kept in it, I kept fuck all in mine. Do you know what I mean? But I know one officer kept a stack of chocolate. It was rammed with chocolate, so we always knew where to go if we wanted the chocolate. But you only had one key. There was only one key to each of the lockers. No one else had access to it. And I have no idea. It wasn't right. I'm going to say this now, and I'm not sure if it's right. My memory is not sure if it's a rumor or whether it was actually found to be true. But judging on what was later found in his locker, I do believe there was sperm found on his keyboard.
Jesus.
Now that again, I'm pretty sure it's not a rumor. I'm pretty sure that was part of the investigation. Anyway, these rumours got too much. So what happens in a prison when you suspect a member of staff of doing something, you put in something called a security information report. So I think what had happened is enough of these reports had gone in, and it was time to crack that egg open. And by fuck did they crack that egg open. So I don't think he was on duty. I think they did it when he was off duty. I could be wrong. So they crack the locker open. I mean, they were quite flimsy lockers. They were dead easy to open. I probably could have opened it with a drawing pin. But anyway, so they cracked the locker open and there is a stack of pornography in there. I mean, what the actual fuck? So I I didn't have to do it. I could tell a story later on about some of the photos I did have to see in the prison service. But anyway, so stack of pornography found. Member of staff had to go through this pornography, and a lot of it was quite brutal S&M, pornography, which I'm not kink shaming anyone. If you're into S&M and it's all consensual, Bob's your uncle. That's absolutely fine. However, you don't bring it into a fucking prison, do you? So not we, but I say we, the prison service, working through the stack, and then it gets to bestiality, which we all know is one, illegal, and two, just fucking weird and gross and disgusting.
It's animal abuse. It's animal abuse as well.
An animal, yeah, of course, animal
so
abuse, yeah.
Animals aren't programmed to do that. Like, do you know what I mean?
Well, no, definitely not by a fucking human anyway.
Yeah.
And so the feeling was that he'd been masturbating at work, hence the sperm on the keyboard, hence the porn in the cupboard, hence the sort of inappropriate relations that maybe he was having with the women. But yeah, so we were like, so that was the talk of the town for a good few months. That kept us fueled about. But yeah, he was pretty much sacked on the spot because I mean, one, bringing it's classed as contraband into the prison, but two, just is fucking gross, isn't it? Excuse me. I'm starting to swear a bit more as I get into the prison stories, aren't I? But that, yeah, I apologise to any listeners, but yeah, there is a lot of fucks.
There's a Jimmy Savile type character, known as Jimmy Savile, the prison service. What was the story with him?
Oh, so this man caused me probably the hardest time in my whole service. So this was when I worked at Manchester Prison. And Manchester Prison is category A prison, so that means it's like high security. It's able to take the worst of the worst prisoners. It's I can't really describe it. It is the most one of the most secure, well, probably the most secure prison in the country, particularly because it's in the city centre, which is quite bizarre. Anyway, so to work in a high security prison as a manager, you need previous experience of working in a high security prison, or you need specific training to come into the high security estate, just because the rules are different, regulations are different. You're dealing with really, really dangerous people. Quite often the police are involved, armed police are involved. We're talking major shit. So the number one governor moves from Manchester Prison, which is quite common. Number one governors move on all the time. They get promotions to headquarters and things like that. So they put this guy in charge who had never worked in the high security estate at all. So we were all like, that's a bit weird. We later found out that he was the nephew of the head of the prison service. So I'm not talking nepotism here, but it was blatantly nepotism. Okay, so this guy was put into this position because of who he knew, not what he knew. He knew nothing about the high security estate. So he bedded himself in for a little bit, and he charmed us. He won us over. We were like, oh my God, what an amazing guy. He's family orientated. He's got a family. A lot of us had kids at the time. And, you really struggle in the prison service with childcare. It's just tough when you're working shifts. But he came in, dead charming. And we were like, oh wow, great, love him. We'd sit in the offices and say, what a nice guy, what a decent person. Um, and then the rumors started, and there were rumors that he was a bit handy, should we say, with people. They'd call it nowadays, when he would slide into people's DMs. so so obviously we have an email system in the prison where you can email people, and
Like I
yeah,
did.
yeah, you slid into my DMs, but I was expecting you to, so that's fine. I'll let you off. So there were rumors, okay, that he was sliding into people's DMs. There was also an officer that worked there who had previously had an affair with him. So we kind of knew that he wasn't whiter than white, let's put it like that. And yeah, so the rumors are ongoing, and we're like, we're not sure if we believe it. Until he slid into my DMs. And I wouldn't touch him if he was the last man on earth. Anyway, I'm not the kind of woman who is impressed by power. He obviously had been using his power, because a lot of the women that were later involved were, and this is no disrespect to the administrative grades, but they were administrative grades, quite low rank. So again, probably the most unlikely to speak. The rumor was that he had rekindled this affair with this other prison officer. So the word out is that he's a bit of a lad, he's a bit of a boy, but prison service is no problem. Do what you do, get away with what you want to. He slid into my DMs one day, and I think I'd messaged him for something, because he was really keen to get me. He seemed to really like me. He was really keen to get me involved in stuff. He was really keen to of get me to do new strategies and set up new committees, and he seemed like, genuinely just seemed to like me, but he was quite professional. Again, I'd heard about these rumors, but I thought, it's not affecting me. So he slid into my DMs one day, and he I said something like, he asked me to attend a meeting, and I said, oh, I can't, I've got half a day off for childcare reasons that day. And he was like, oh, right, okay, so are you married? You have a son. How old's your son? What's your relationship like? I said I was going on holiday, and this just sort of progressed into like a really chatty conversation, which is not what you expect with a senior manager. And basically, I sort of ended the conversation with, I'm very happily married, and I have a son, and they're my absolute priority. So kind of just in a very subtle way, stopping that interaction, which I think he perceived as a knockback. Okay. So then proceeded the harassment, the bullying, I was reduced to tears in meetings. Other staff were coming up to me saying, oh my God, I can't believe he's spoken to you like that. It's because I'd cut him off, basically, and said I'm not interested. He slagged me off in emails that were sent to me, so I knew what he was saying behind my back. He was calling me into his office numerous times, saying, what's the problem between us? And just really just being quite horrible. And I actually said to him, I'd rather go and be a waitress at the moment than work here. But I still didn't speak up. So when it eventually came to a head, and he was, because the rumors were rife, so he's bullying, he's having inappropriate relationships with people, he's a bit handy with people, he's taking it too far, he's harassing people via email, he's asking people to come to his apartment in his house. So he was that's for. So eventually he was reported, and we all had a file. So all the victims had a file. And I remember going for my investigation interview and bumping into sort of one other woman who had kind of who had kind of fallen for his sort of charms, so to speak. And I remember looking in the office before I went in for the interview, the folders and the stack of folders was like that. It was so many women, had, and they'd not come through willingly. They, like me, I was forced to give evidence even when I hadn't reported him. It then turned out that he had a long history of harassment and again being handy at his previous prison. So he came here under a cloud, and like I say, stack of women like that, all and the files like that, all the way down. How I got an apology from the head of the prison service. So the original one, who was his uncle, was immediately retired. Funny that, you know. Um, and the head of the prison service came and apologized to me. Um, the ex-governor came and apologized to me, and I just said, this isn't good enough. This is not good enough. There is again, I did speak out, and I said, there's misogyny, there's problems with your recruiting, there's nepotism. This guy was a type A personality, he's a psychopath, and he's come in and he's harassed and destroyed all these women. I mean, I went on holiday, and when he was eventually suspended, I was rang when I was on holiday. I mean, he was in the sun, for God's sake. Do you know what I mean? He was in the sun. I was tipped off that my name might go into the sun because he seemed to particularly have a problem with me.
It wouldn't be read in Liverpool anyway, so
well, I know, yeah, it is a scum paper. I agree, 100% agree with that. But yeah, and I certainly didn't want my fucking name in it. Do you know what I mean? So he was eventually suspended, but he then resigned. So these people get away with shit. He was never brought to task. There was never any criminal or civil claims. I do wish now that I'd taken a civil claim out against him, because he was horrendous. He was. If he didn't get what he wanted, he terrorized you. And I used to sit in the car park shaking like this, literally whole body shaking, thinking, what am I going into today? What am I going to have to face today? Am I going to come out in tears at dinner time? I was put on medication by my doctor to sort of for my anxiety. And I said, I'm being horrendously bullied at work. And he said, why don't you report it? I mean, everyone saw what he was doing to me, but everyone was so scared of him. And again, that goes back to that culture of you don't grass. You don't tell people what's happening. And people knew it. People could see it. People saw me in tears. He reduced other people to tears, but it was the sexual stuff. And the thing is, I'm not even joking, he was a fucking minger. He was, do you know what I mean? I wouldn't mind if he looked like George Clooney or fucking Tom Hardy. I mean, if it was Tom Hardy, I'd totally have taken him up on his offer. Do you know what I mean? But he was gross. And he was obviously just using his power and this fucking false charm to get in the knickers of like hundreds of women. But he didn't get in mine.
Harvey Weinstein springs to mind there when
Definitely, definitely. I think that would be more of a sort of appropriate, an appropriate likeness, analogy, but yeah. So he resigned. He's still working. He's probably still doing what he does with women. I don't think, unless he's had his balls cut off, but I doubt that's happened.
We'll come to chemical castration in a while.
Yes.
Before I have this on my tip of my tongue when we mentioned the Scum newspaper there. I'm just going to quote your namesake as a story. You obviously know the story with Hillsborough and
yes,
the son front page of the newspaper saying the truth that Liverpool fans picked the pockets of the dead bodies and beating up the cops, giving kiss of life and pissing in dead bodies and all this, like. And the editor of The Sun at the time, Kelvin McKenzie, twat, he obviously was concerned by the boycott of The Sun in Merseyside, like, and he rang up Liverpool Football Club and got through to the secretary, Peter Robinson, and he asked to be put through to your distant relative, Kenny. And an audience with the King, like the King's speech. And he said, Kenny, how can we... I surprised Kenny spoke to him on the phone, but anyway, he said to him, what can we do to solve this? And he said, well, do you know the front newspaper heading that you had, the front page of the newspaper, saying the truth? If you can do another similar size one saying we lied, you might be okay. And he said, well, I can't do that. And he said, well, I can't help you then. Bang, off the phone. So that just came into my head there.
Good for him. Good for him. But do you know what? It was shocking though, the amount of people, because obviously I live down south. I think Arsenal was our local team. I remember, the reason I remember Hillsborough is because my brother lives in Sheffield, and he was at is it Notts Forest they were playing?
Yeah, Nottingham Forest.
Yeah, and he was at the opposite end of the stand on that day. So obviously I was aware of it. And the shocking thing is, and my mum, who doesn't read newspapers, but I very clearly remember it at the time, she believed it. Because people believed it, because so many people read that newspaper at the time. Hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of people believed that about, and I can only say from my part, when I went to work at Liverpool, it was the best place I've ever worked. You know what I mean? The people, the heart, the loyalty that I was given as well. It sickens me to think that these people were accused of that. I worked with people that had lost family members. I worked with people that had been there on the day. One guy in particular, he was only 16 and he went with a couple of friends, and his mum, because I don't think mobile phones weren't a thing, were they?
No.
And his mum couldn't get hold of him for 24 hours. So just as a mum myself, just imagine going through that. You can't get hold of your son. You've seen all this on the TV. So yeah, it is, having worked in Liverpool, it's still very, very, very raw. It's still, something that that people will never forget, and sort of it's infused through the city, which is
just the kind of the after effects of that, like a lot of opposition fans sing at Anfield, always the victim, never your fault. That's a common chant and that. But I've been at Anfield, Liverpool played United last year, Man United, and some Man United fans have a chant referencing the Sun, saying the Sun was right, you're murderers.
It makes me feel sick.
Yeah, it's there's an element Liverpool fans that are known saint either, like singing songs about Harold Shipman and Munich air disaster and all that. So I wouldn't tar them off with the same brush, but that's a bad chant to sing,
Yeah.
I was at the Champions League final in Paris back in May, and I got caught up in a crush. You heard of just the hassle in Paris, did you, a few months ago with the admissions? Like, I got crushed up against, I had a 60-year-old woman crushed behind me.
Oh, don't.
I watched the game in pain, like my back and chest. Like I've logged matches and I couldn't log that game. I was in pain and I didn't think it was appropriate. When I got up to the gate, I actually had to jump the turnstile. It's different turnstiles in Paris. It's not like the normal turnstile where you have a small space and you squeeze through. Mm-hmm. It's like the entrance to a workplace or building. You have like 4 different turnstiles and you can jump over them basically.
Yeah.
If you left. And I had to jump over the turnstile when I got past the gate, because otherwise it would have been crushed against it. Like, you know what I mean?
Jesus Christ.
So the point I'm making is that was a relatively quick 15, 20 seconds combined, you know, and it left a bit of a mark on me, to be honest. Like, I was getting flashbacks for a while after it.
Yeah.
So someone who was actually in Leppings Lane that day, you know, just I can only imagine, like, the
Are you trying to make me cry today?
No, I'm just
I'm such an emotional person.
yeah.
And like I say, I can talk about things that happen to me with like relative, like almost humor. But when it comes to other people, which probably made me sort of more empathic in my job, you know, probably made me better. But when I hear about things happening to other people, I literally can't cope.
What really fucked me off when we went into the stadium, like I said, the kickoff has been delayed by 30 minutes due to fans arriving late. I was like, you can fuck right off of that.
Yeah.
I've been in that queue since 6:30, 2.5
I saw
hours
that, yeah.
before kickoff. So yeah, the UEFA anthem is booed at Anfield. And just to get back, the reason Anfield doesn't hold Liverpool or England games is because Sun journalists are banned from Anfield. So they won't get World Cup games because of that. So, like they said, if you're not going to leave the Sun in, you're not going to get the England friendly. And they're like, that's fine. We'll sacrifice England friendly. And Klopp as well. Like, Klopp in a press conference, a Sun journalist was asking him a question. He said, "Sorry, I can't speak to you."
Good for him. Yeah, good for him. Because he wasn't even there, was he? He was in, you know.
But he's adopted very much the culture of Liverpool. And like, I think the issue was there's a big connection between Liverpool and Ireland, going back to the famine and there's a lot of immigration. I think the negative stereotypes that Irish people had, of being drunk, lazy, work shy, kind of chancers, thieves, whatever, that kind of came into Liverpool. The rest of the UK view Liverpool kind of like that.
Yeah.
And like, there's Welsh as well, Welsh and Irish connections. It's more a Celtic city rather than Anglo-Saxon. Seeing as we've gone down a Liverpool rabbit hole there, we may as well reference a very famous Liverpool character who you cross paths with, and I suppose you clashed with. A man who's come up in conversation a few of my podcasts already so far, especially with Jeff Otterhead, who wrote a song about living in the cell next to him, Purple Aki. So for people who are not familiar with Purple Aki, Holly, maybe just give a kind of bit of background to.
Oh God, where do I start? Okay, so Purple Aki is a guy. He's a real person. So I'll describe what he looks like. So without wanting to sound sort of racist, but it's an actual observation. He is very, very dark skinned, to the point where he appears purple, shall we say? That, you know, that's where his Purple Aki comes from. Aki is a sort of shortening of his name. I think his actual name is Akinwala or something like that.
So Arambiki, I think, isn't it?
Arambiki, yeah. But his first names, I think, is Akinwala or something. Anyway, so this is guy notorious in Liverpool for, I would say, decades now. So he has a penchant, shall we say, for muscular men and boys. Okay, so he is renowned for asking to touch men's biceps, asking them to squat in front of them, asking them if they could squat with him on his back. So I just describe, he's 6'4", 5". Just imagine John Coffey out of the Green Mile. Okay, so he's a big, huge, intimidating guy. Okay, and he used that to intimidate people. He intimidated witnesses. He allegedly, and I say allegedly because he was never convicted of this, chased a young lad that he was trying to inappropriately touched. And this lad unfortunately ran onto some train tracks and was killed by a train. So this is part of his mythology, shall we say. So sort of like Scouse people used to say to their kids, you know, if you don't behave, Purple Aki is going to get you. You know, he was like this mythical person. He's a real person. He really does assault people, or shall I say, young muscular men. Okay, and it's very bizarre because he's been placed on a sexual prevention order. So the police issue these things called SPOs, and they are normally issued to sort of high risk sex offenders. He's been issued with an SPO, but he's never ever been convicted of a sexual offence. He has got off more offences than I've probably had hot dinners. He is intelligent, articulate. He studies law. And I won't say he studies law officially. He studies law on his off his own back. He helps other prisoners with their cases. He is, like I say, very well known, very distinctive, and does a relative amount of prison stints on remand, and that means waiting to go to court, not convicted. But yeah, so the police have been onto him for years and years and years and years. There was one judge, allegedly, and I'll say again, allegedly, said that one of the reasons he dismissed his case was that the whole reason bodybuilders, or, you know, build up their muscles is so that other people are impressed. And why wouldn't Mr. Aki want to go and touch this man's muscles? Yeah, mate, but it's the squatting and the, you know, the intimidation of young boys, and then intimidating the families that, you know, the young boys that, you know, have felt like they're, you know, being coerced into performing semi-sexual acts in front of him. Anyway, so that's the sort of background of the geezer. He thinks he's it. He thinks he's Mr. Intelligent. Well, I think I'm Mrs. Intelligent. So obviously, I think I'm sort of, you know, the dog's bollocks. And he doesn't, when he's in prison, he doesn't approach staff. So he won't speak to staff because staff are beneath him. And he doesn't believe that they'll do anything for him because he's always on to something. He's always on about an appeal or a complaint or, you know, something like that. So I would walk down the wing and it was a case of dodging him, because as soon as he sees like a manager, he's like straight on you because he thinks you're going to sort the fucking world out for him. Anyway, so it was like dodge the Aki. So you'd be walking. So Liverpool's got this like really long wing that runs down the centre of the jail, and somewhat they let him out as a cleaner. So a cleaner is out all day with access to sort of everywhere and everything. And I'm not sure whether they put him as a cleaner so that they could observe him and keep an eye on him, which makes sense, or whether they were just so intimidated by him that they just got, you know, they just gave him this position. Anyway, so I would walk down the wing and I might be wearing heels, so it's like clack, 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 clack. He could hear me coming, and I swear he used to hide around fucking corners and just wait for me to come round, you know, come down. So most people used to fuck him off, but I don't believe in that. I believe in listening to people, whoever they are and whatever they've got to say. So I would give him like a smidgen of my time. That smidgen of my time would turn into an hour, because we would start into some sort of debate around the rules and regulations of the prison and what you can and you can't do and stuff like that. And because I'm a like I say, a Mrs. Intelligent, or so I think, and he thinks he's super articulate and Mr. Intelligent, we would go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, to the point where I think we actually had this like grudging respect for each other, because I'd never given him what he wanted, but I would stand and listen and I'd talk. And I think he was quite keen to just have an intelligent conversation. Not saying that anyone else didn't, but no one else used to speak to him. So I was the only dickhead that used to give him the time of day. So we would have these sort of back and forths. And eventually, like, I would be the one to tell him like some bad news, you know. So there was one time that we had some information that he was intimidating one of the younger guys on the cleaning part. So we had some information, some intelligence that he was potentially harassing a younger guy on the wing. So any chance that we ever had, we used to put him on segregation unit. Obviously, the safest place in the prison. You only get out 23 hours a day, etc., etc. Guess who was the governor of the segregation unit at the time? Well, it was me, wasn't it? So I had the infinite pleasure of speaking to him every single day of my shifts. So I had to allow extra time, obviously, in my day to deal with him, because I couldn't just get away. Couldn't tell him to fuck off, because I don't tell, you know, I would tell some people to fuck off, but he was not the kind of guy that you told to fuck off. And staff would be there with me, and staff would like be trying to stand in front of me, and I'm like, no, I can deal with this guy. And he just thought he was the dog's bollocks. He just thought he knew everything, and he would argue everything to the minute point. And you know, particularly if he was on the segregation unit, because we can put people on the segregation unit based on intelligence, and we don't have we don't have to tell them. So he would like the complaints, the back and forths. So eventually one day he got released, which is great. So he's out of my face, he's out of my hair, I don't have to see him again. So he needs discharging. So when you discharge a prisoner, particularly if they're on something called license. So I don't know how it works in Ireland, but they're released on license. So they have a certain amount of conditions that they need to, you know, abide by in order to stay out of prison, because otherwise they can be brought back anytime. So, for example, if they drink, take drugs, you know, don't stay at an approved place. So most people have maybe 10 conditions at the absolute most. And what happens is a manager has to go through them all, get them to sign it, get them to agree it, and then they can go. Then they can piss off back and do whatever they want to do. So obviously, the day that Mr. Aki is being released, dickhead here is the one that's been told to release him. God knows why. So I go down to the reception unit. No word of a lie. This guy had about 80 license conditions, and I'll tell you what they were. So let's talk about specific. So we're sat there and he's saying, I'm not going to agree to any of this. I'm not listening. I'm not doing what you tell me. And I'm like, right, this time you really do need to shut the fuck up. Listen, because this is going to take me an hour to get through this. So the license conditions included, you are not allowed to ask anyone under the age of 16 to perform a squat in front of you. You are not allowed to ask anyone over the age of 18 to perform a squat in front of you. You are not allowed to touch the bicep of any male that you come into contact with. You are not allowed to touch the thigh muscle of any, and you get the picture, yeah?
Or so gyms, I imagine gyms as well were kind of off limits for them, were they?
So he had to have a map. So if they're in for harassment or victim witness intimidation or anything like that, and particularly where victims live, map. And he had loads of maps where he couldn't go to, and he couldn't go to gyms, he couldn't go to parks, he couldn't go to anywhere where there was like a risk of someone working out, so he couldn't go to like sports clubs or anything like that. So there was this map, and he's just sat there and he's like, I'm not going to agree to this, I'm not going to do it. So I'm taking a complaint out against Greater Manchester Police who's enforced this on me. I'm complaining everything, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, by this point, I'm like, oh my God, I've been dealing with you for months. Please just sign the fucking paperwork and fuck off out of my face, because I will gain about 2 extra hours a day where I can actually do some proper prison work. So yeah, he went, just as a sort of a side story. He
Sorry, did he actually sign it in the end, or?
yeah, I forced him.
Okay,
Yeah, I forced him, because I'm like, I can't deal with you. Just fucking sign it. And I think out of the grudging respect that we had for each other, I think he signed it with the sort of, I think I had to write something on like, however, he will be appealing
yeah.
said license conditions. So just as an aside note, I talked about the SPO, the sexual prevention order. He actually had that overturned, so he actually won that case in court, which is quite interesting. Although Greater Manchester Police do believe that he has committed many other offences and never ever been caught. But yeah, he's a really, I mean, I was at Liverpool, got us first at Liverpool in 2005. So we're going back almost like 20 years. So I really don't think he's the character now that he was then. But yes, had a proclivity for touching muscles and biceps and things like that. And some people might, it's quite interesting, because had he been a woman, would he have had the same treatment? I don't know. It's an interesting thought, isn't it? It's just something out there.
There
But yeah,
probably wouldn't have been as much complaints by the lads if there were, but that's that's another story. Uh,
exactly.
I have an anecdote about Purple Akki there that I'd like to share.
Go on.
Jake was on. Jake would have known him as well from Liverpool and that Purple Aki. But Jake was on. He's a comedian in Wigan called Jimmy O. I don't know if you've heard of him.
No, no, no.
The Jimmy O show. Um, but Jimmy had a story there where, like, when he was younger, he used to go to the gym and he was 18, 19. He used to walk around Wigan with like a sleeveless wife beater top. The one, like, and
Yeah.
he's a big guy now, like, and Aki came up to him and said, "Can I feel your muscles?" Wigan, like, and he was like, "If you want, like, and he was like, said, Joe, when you're young, you want recognition when you're walking out, and someone finally give you recognition that you're actually you're working, it's showing
Yeah.
progress, like. And the way he said it, he was like, at the time I was very low. At the time I was very lonely, and I he asked him, Aki, if he wanted to go for a coffee, and Aki was like, "No, you're fine." And he was like, "Things are so bad in my life, even Purple Aki fucked me off." Like,
Amazing story. Oh my God, bless him.
I was just
Mm.
that character, just the Purple Aki, kind of intrigued me. So that's
Yeah,
why.
he's part of Liverpool mythology. He's he's part of, almost part of the culture. I
Yeah,
mean, people come on, so like I've done quite, I've done other podcasts, and people come on pretending to be him, but it's quite interesting because sometimes there's comments and you think, that's quite an accurate comment, actually. Is it really you? Because I
yeah.
think he watches, because he knows he's notorious. I don't know if he watches it, but sometimes, yeah, some of the comments that's made under the name of Aki, you think, yeah, could be you, could be you.
I saw once Billy Moore, who does another podcast, that Billy Moore was having some relationship issues at one stage, and he ended up sitting on a bus across the way from Aki, and Aki gave him great relationship tips at the time, and Billy Moore was very thankful for it. I was thinking of
Oh
all people to get relationship advice.
God.
But as
Yeah.
Jeff Holler had said, like, if he'd become a masseuse or something, you know,
Yes.
he could have done all, he could have, you know, massage muscles and got his kicks that way without.
What a fantastic idea.
I doubt he'll get a license for it now, though. But
No.
so, yeah.